Good afternoon, and continuing in our reflections on Laudato Si of Pope Francis. Those of you who weren't here, we began this a few months ago, and we're going through the pontifical exhortation or the apostolic exhortation Laudato Si on the care of the earth, or our common home, as Pope Francis calls it. So far we have seen, first of all, in the earlier part, his account of what's happening on earth, looking at the situation as it is, and then he looked quite a bit at what the Bible has to say about creation and our relationship with creatures. And in chapter 3, which we're going to look at or reflect on today, he speaks about the human roots of the ecological crisis, the human roots of the ecological crisis. He reminds us that the ecological crisis has human origins, and the reason is that the understanding of human life and of human activity, he says, has gone a bit awry, gone a bit astray. He looks at the technology and the technological development over the last couple of centuries. Speaks about, for example, the development of railways, the telegraph, trains, aeroplanes, and he doesn't go on so much at this point to modern stuff like cell phones or anything, but he's just showing how much has happened technologically over the last couple of centuries. And he admits all of that was very good. So much of it was a great help to human beings. But St. John Paul II, he also approved of it. He said, "Science and technology are wonderful products of a God-given human creativity." So it's because of what God has given human beings that all these developments have been able to take place. Then also he looks at particularly medicine, engineering, and communications. And he mentions that much that used to harm people and limit human beings has been overcome through these fields: medicine, engineering, and communications development. But the problem is, he says, that the control of these developments rests mostly with the rich, and this gives them a great power over humanity if they have control of these things. It's a power, he said, which has been and is sometimes abused. And he refers, for example, to the dropping of the atomic bomb, or to the worst crimes of Nazism and communism and other totalitarian regimes, where millions of people have been killed. So that's through the abuse of these fields and this knowledge that has been got, rather than being used to help people. Moreover, there are, he said, now huge arsenals of weapons in the world today, and they're in the hands of a few people and a few nations. Romano Guardini was a great Christian writer of the last century, priest, and he said, "Contemporary man has not been trained to use power well." There's a great lack of responsibility there, for a great lack of values, a lack of conscience. And the only norms, Guardini says, are taken from alleged necessity, from either utility or security. Is it useful to us at this point now? Or is it necessary for security in our eyes? Is it necessary? We know that many claims are made about things not being revealed. For example, there being a lack of openness because of security. And of course that again is in the hands of a few people in the country. So these are some things where there hasn't always been the proper use of the great developments that have taken place. The basic problem today, he says, is the way humanity seeks as a subject to use logical and rational procedures and aims to gain control over an external object. What he's getting at here is that human beings are trying to possess, to master, and to change, transform matter and creation without, however, taking into account what it has to offer us. In other words, there's a kind of a disregard for creation as it is, and some human beings are just trying to treat it as if they could do anything with it, as absolute masters of it. And he has spoken about this earlier on in the apostolic exhortation. But as he points out, there's a kind, therefore, of a confrontational tension between human beings and creation as it came from God. And it's based on a lie, that there is an infinite supply of the earth's goods, which is not true. There's not an infinite supply. Technological products controlled by powerful groups tend to force people into a particular lifestyle, so that it has become countercultural to choose a lifestyle whose goals are even partly independent of technology. And we do find that some people want to live a kind of a different lifestyle, but because it doesn't fit in with the view of those who have control of technology and profits and all the rest, there's a kind of a disregard of them. They're just ignored very often. Profits have become the goal, and the freedom and creativity are diminished as a result. There is what I think it was Pope Benedict maybe who called it super development, but also a dehumanizing deprivation. So there has been huge development, but at the same time a deprivation which has been dehumanizing. Science alone can't solve the problem. It must work with philosophy and social ethics. And this is another point that Pope Francis is getting at, that there has to be a combining of the knowledge and of the way of attacking things, not just a technological scientific approach trying to get a solution, but rather working with philosophy and ethics and other fields, more human fields if you like, more social fields, so that there will be a combined answer to the ecological crisis as it is. And he mentions a new way of thinking, a need for policies, an educational program, a lifestyle and a spirituality in order to deal with the problems we face, which he mentions pollution, environmental decay, and the depletion of natural resources. He does see some hope, however, at the present time, in that people now see that science and technology alone will not give us a better future. We need to acknowledge the good from the past, but also recover values and recover goals that have been swept away. So all of this, it's a very balanced approach he's taken to all of this in trying to resolve what has been happening to the ecology. Nature is seen as raw material by some to be hammered into useful shape. The cosmos is seen as a mere space into which objects can be thrown with indifference. But our dominion over the world needs to be understood in the sense of responsible stewardship. That means, of course, that God has given us the earth to use it, to develop it, to use our brains, to use our freedom, to develop things. But it's for the good of people, and in order to bring the best out of what's there. If we're not owners, we're not masters. We came across this earlier too. God is the owner of the land. God is the owner of creation. And we are only stewards. We are only doing what God has wanted us to do. And if we try to do otherwise and act as if God didn't exist and if God weren't the master of creation, then we're doing the wrong thing. So getting back to that is then acting as responsible stewards. Everything in nature is connected. While aiming to renew our relationship with nature, we must renew also to human beings. For example, the worth of a poor man, the human embryo, and persons with disabilities. We have to keep those in mind as we look at solutions as well. The unique value of human beings, indeed, must be respected. Now, the practical relativism is another point he talks about, where that relativism which exceeds today gives absolute priority to immediate convenience, and all else becomes relative. For example, people are forced to labour hard for little or nothing. That's because they have to be useful to those who are in power. Or sexual exploitation of children, or allowing the market forces to regulate the economy without taking account of the impact of this on society. The value of human work must be taken into account. Men and women are given the task by God of both preserving and making fruitful the garden of the world. And he quotes here the Second Vatican Council, the document of the Church in the modern world. It says, man is the source, the focus, and the aim of all economic and social life. Man is the source, the focus, and the aim of all economic and social life. The unique value, that is, of the human being. Machines, therefore, must not replace humans. People should be allowed a dignified life through work, and civil authorities should support small producers and differentiated production, rather than big businesses only succeeding and having a place, and things being brought together more and more because you can produce more at a cheaper rate. So there is need for that differentiation of production as well, and the support of the small producers. And then Pope Francis speaks of human intervention on plants and animals, genetic engineering, I suppose you call it. And what about it? He says, when it pertains to the necessities of human life, it is permissible. But experimentation on animals is acceptable only if it remains within reasonable limits and contributes to caring or saving human lives. Caring for or saving human lives. It is difficult to make a general judgment about it, he says, about genetic modification, since the different areas vary and are call for specific considerations. Moreover, genetic mutations are sometimes caused, he says, by nature itself. Things are going on in nature that human beings, even if they're not interfering it in any way, they're still happening just through nature itself. And he also refers to the long history over centuries where in some way humans have interfered. For example, in the crossbreeding of species or domestication of animals, he mentions as well, where there has been a kind of a human interference with nature, but it hasn't been bad and it has been generally accepted. So it's not that changing or interfering in some way is bad in itself. It's what use is made of it and what are the effects it's having on human beings. In nature, moreover, this process is very slow, whereas, as we know, there has been a huge and rapid advancement from the point of view of human interference. There are also other difficulties with the modern methods, such as production becoming less diverse and selection of information from research to suit particular interests. Not the whole truth is being given to people, only part of it that suits. A comprehensive approach therefore is needed, and more financial help for research. And there's also, he says, a troubling inconsistency in that when some ecological movements defend the integrity of the environment and rightly demand that certain limits be imposed on scientific research, they sometimes fail to apply these same principles to human life. Technology, therefore, must have regard for ethical principles, or it will not easily be able to limit its own power. So that's what he says in chapter 3 of the document. Now, this could just appear as a kind of a summary of the document, but as we know, this is the time for reflection, and the purpose of it all is to ask ourselves, and maybe as a group, what does it mean from our point of view? What effect is it going to have on our attitude to what's happening in the world at the present time in this regard? And what are we going to do about it? All of that is part really of fulfilling the rule and of living the gospel and living God's will more fully and better. So it's important that we don't see it just as an information thing, but rather as something to reflect on a bit. So we don't have time to do it here maybe, but take it home and do it. Thank you.